I'm not exaggerating when I say that Heart, the City Beneath is one of the most fascinating point crawl RPGs I've ever encountered. It's definitely born of this whole movement in the OSR where characters are thrown into a wildly imaginative and hostile world and made to journey from location to location, facing weird and dreamlike horrors. But this game is not really OSR in its rule set, and I think that's kind of why I love it even more. Heart, the City Beneath is an RPG published by Rowan, Rook, and Decard, and written by Christopher Taylor and Grant Howitt, and is illustrated by Felix Miall, published in 2020. It's the successor game to Spire, The City Must Fall, another RPG by the same publisher and creators, which I reviewed on this channel a few months ago. I'll leave a link to that review below. Heart was the winner of 7 Ennie Awards in 2021, including silvers for Best Game and Best Monster Adversary, as well as golds for Best Setting, Best Writing, Best Layout and Design, Best Cover Art, and Best Interior Artwork. So yeah, it was sort of the game of the year of 2021 if you put any stock into the Ennie Awards. A quick word from the sponsor of this video. The 3D printable Initiative Towers by Degenerate Polygons makes it fun and easy to track initiative. Their main model for this product is a modular castle tower with magnetic label arcs that can be quickly rearranged to track initiative. Both towers will also have a mechanical version that doesn't require magnets. If you do use magnets, they will be the inexpensive 8mm by 2mm round magnets. You can paint the faces of these labels with either chalkboard paint to use chalk, or with whiteboard paint so that you can use dry erase markers to write on them. The labels are curved so that everyone at the table can easily read them. And the tower is modular so you can stack as many sections as you want. On top is a cup area to store your dice. Additionally, this project includes a scaled down, simplified version of the Initiative Tower that is more lightweight and better suited to travel. The Kickstarter is pay what you want for the models that can be 3D printed at home. I've left a link below so you can grab yours. Now, back to the review. In this game, which shares the same setting and basic rules foundation as its predecessor Spire, you are a delver. Someone who, for one reason or another, decides to descend below the city of Spire into a strange, sort of vast, living dungeon called Heart. Or rather, it's referred to as Heart since there is some entity at the very bottom that is causing all the weirdness called Heart. There is mention of Heart in the first game, Spire, but it's not very well described. In this game, which is a standalone RPG, Heart is illustrated in copious description, but due to its mysterious, reality-bending nature, many of the details are optional, and you're encouraged to fill in the blanks with your own weird ideas. Just to be more specific here, the authors are working in a world that they established in Spire and reiterate here, and it's that there is this land of Destera, and in this land, a mysterious, massive vertical tower city called Spire. Spire is ruled by Elfir, or High Elves, who rule over the majority Dark Elves, or Drow. There are also humans who have immigrated from elsewhere, and outcast gnolls who are either slaves or untouchables dwelling in the shadows. Below the city of Spire, there is Heart, a quote, blossoming tear in reality, a parasite universe of blood and bones seeping into the world of man and elf. The Heart can taste and smell you, and it makes itself anew in your image. It listens to your dreams and fashions your reward, your punishment, your world. What exactly is the entity down at the bottom causing all this weirdness? Well, the authors suggest it could be a friendly gray goo from another dimension trying to reinvent itself into a form that can be trusted by the inhabitants of this planet, or a cocoon of a god that will shake the foundations of reality when attached, or a terraforming unit sent from the future meant to make the planet more hospitable to life but shouldn't be directly tampered with. This is the kind of game this is, by the way. It's a sort of anything goes setting, but within the confines of dark and ominous tones. Characters at Heart are made up of their class and their calling. Narratively, you also choose an ancestry, aka a race. And that can be a High Elf or an Elfir, Dark Elf or Drow, human or gnoll. And that choice doesn't afford any mechanical bonuses or anything. The authors ask you to remember that the Elfir are racist and look down on other races, but not to act that out at the table. They say that down in the Heart, people hate you because of what you believe in or which settlement you live in, not your ancestry. As far as your character's calling, that's your reason for delving down into the Heart. There are 5 callings: Adventure, Enlightenment, Forced, Heartsong, and Penitent. And these are connected to a pretty important aspect of the game called beats. Each player starts off a game session with 2 beats active. These are personal goals shared only with the GM. They can choose from minor beats, which can usually be accomplished in 1 session, major beats, which should take 2 to 3 sessions to check off, and a zenith beat, which signals that the character is about to be done, either through retirement or some explosive death. The beats are a special feature of this game because they signal to the GM how to prep the adventure beforehand, and it does so in broad strokes that don't actually require too much prep. And beats also have the function of helping guide players towards what their character really wants. It's not just that they're going down into the heart to kill things or amass a fortune. It could be one of hundreds of dramatic seeds. After sorting out your ancestry and callings, each player chooses a class. Classes are quite distinctive and thematic in this game, so I'll briefly describe each one. It should also be mentioned here that when you choose a class, you're given some core traits like a skill, domain, and some equipment. You also get 2 core abilities that define you, and you can unlock minor and major abilities over the course of sessions. You can also unlock zenith abilities, which I'll get to in a minute. The first class listed is Cleavers. These are individuals who hunt and consume the animals of heart and have thus transmogrified into somewhat monstrous denizens of the place. Their abilities reflect wild ferocity and bloody transmutation. Deadwalkers are partially dead, partially alive revenants who are each followed by a spectral companion that whispers in their ear. Their abilities are all death and soul related, giving them the power to see into the spectral past or make devastating, death-dealing attacks. The Deep Apiarist is a cultist who has given their body to a collective entity composed of bees. Their body is partially hollowed out and filled with living bees and honeycomb, and their abilities almost all reflect actions by these bees. Heretics are the descendants of outcasts from the city of Spire above, who were cast down for belonging to the Church of the Moon and worshipping a goddess named Damnau. Their abilities deal with divine magic and a connection to this moon goddess. Hounds are the bearers of one of 300 warrior badges, each of which was worn by a soldier who died in a heroic last stand in Heart years or decades ago. The badge that you hold confers authority as a soldier, and you generally have the abilities of an army type of soldier, hardened by war. Incarnadines are individuals who have become so indebted to the Crimson God of Debt, Incarn, that they've had to give up not just property and possessions, but memories, family members, emotions, and desires. They are beyond desperate to pay their abilities carry the theme of luck, bargaining, and making deals. The Junk Mage is essentially a magic user, but one whose greatest innate desire is to steal the power and the arcane magic of the heart. Their abilities are mostly spells that run the gamut of possible effects, from magic detection to protection, ranged attacks, and healing. The Vermissian Knight is a servant or protector of the Vermissian, a cursed centuries-old mass transit tunnel that was meant to interconnect various parts of Spire to the heart, and ended up a failure, never completed, but the tunnels that were left behind transformed over time into strange places. The knights wear pastiche armor, inscribed with the places they have traveled to within Heart, utilizing their knightly abilities as guides down below. Witches in Heart are carriers of a bloodborne disease that connects them to a larger collective entity and confers witchly powers and abilities. Socially, they are regarded as nobility of heart, and they maintain that reputation by closely guarding their disease and practicing strange and esoteric rituals that no outsider understands. I wanted to circle back here and mention a feature of this game that I thought was pretty notable, and that is the zenith abilities. You start with core abilities, and over time can unlock minor and major abilities, and completely by player choice you can unlock so-called zenith abilities, of which there are 2 or 3 per class. These are wildly powerful spells or conjurations that often end up in the destruction of the character itself. They often involve the character giving themselves over to a greater power, which transforms them temporarily or permanently into an entity that can lay waste to any kind of enemy beside the heart itself, or otherwise transform a settlement called a landmark. These abilities are one of my favorite aspects of this whole game because they embrace the fact that the game is meant to be played in 1 to maybe at most 8 sessions, at least with any given character. Characters are meant to live for a while and then die in a blast of glory down below, hopefully in a way that helps the rest of the party. I did find that one zenith ability, the ultimate reward for the Incarnadine, actually allows the character to live. They simply pay off their debt to the debt god and live a peaceful life, but that is very much the exception and not the rule here. There are many different dice that you use in this game, but anytime you need to make a skill check, you're working with a D10 dice pool. The steps are: start with one D10, add a D10 if you have a point in a skill that applies, add another D10 if you have a domain that applies, and yet another D10 if you have mastery in an applicable skill. Then you roll all the D10s. If the difficulty of the check was normal, then you take the highest number rolled. If it was deemed risky, you take the second highest roll. If it was deemed dangerous, you take the third highest roll. The GM will tell you the difficulty of a check before you roll. Success is determined by consulting a chart. Your highest remaining D10 roll can range from a critical failure to a critical success, and for the most part, you will likely take stress. On a 7 or less, the GM will then roll a D12 to determine if you also suffer a fallout, which is a mechanical condition placed on your character that deteriorates their overall condition or abilities in one way or another. When you take on stress, it can be against one of 5 resistances. You can think of stress against resistances as damage to one of 5 types of character health. Blood is physical, echo is psycho-spiritual, mind is mental or psychological, fortune is luck and ego, and supplies is an abstraction of your resources generally. And as far as skills, there are 9 in the game, and you can always roll a check with one without penalty. It's just that if you happen to have training in one, you get an extra D10 in your roll. Domains are areas, both physical and practical, where your character can have special knowledge in. There are 8 domains in the game, and they do come up frequently because you're always going to want to see if you can roll that extra D10 for a roll. Removing stress can either be done with certain abilities, contributing resources to a special area called a haunt, or taking fallout. Anytime you take fallout, your stress track for that particular resistance is cleared. Combat is described minimally in the book. You're often going to roll the kill skill, but hunt and evade are also often used. There is no turn order in Heart. Instead, every player can make as many actions on their turn as logic would allow, and the action is supposed to follow to the next PC or NPC logically. Fallout comes in 3 categories: minor, major, and critical, and they are broken out by resistance. So a minor blood fallout would be a minor physical injury, or something like being tired or having broken armor. A minor fortune fallout would be that you are separated from your group or there are bad rumors going around about you. Major fallout is going to hobble your character a bit more seriously. And if you recall, minor and major fallout is determined simply by a D12 roll by the GM after a relatively common skill check. So you could very suddenly pick up a major fallout at any time in this game. Critical fallout is when the GM combines 2 active major fallouts that a character has, and basically this just leads to a description of how the character is taken out of the game for good, either by death, transformation, or some other loss of autonomy. Resources are defined largely by their descriptive tags and their value. Value is defined with step dice, D4 being the least valuable and D12 being the most. Equipment that is used by characters is similarly defined by descriptive tags and by a dice size ranging from D4 to D12. When using equipment to attack or heal, you would use the dice size associated with that equipment to see how much stress is dealt or taken away, provided that you succeeded your skill roll in the first place. There is a whole page full of tags that carry mechanical definitions for items in the game, and this is one of the pages that would be helpful to print out or have bookmarked for all players to reference, since the tags come up frequently enough in the game. So as far as actually exploring the heart, there is a fairly unique set of mechanics for doing so. Characters are called delvers in this game, and they make delves. A delve is any journey between 2 landmarks. And for the record, a landmark is any place where people have gathered or settled, ranging from a small encampment to a town-sized settlement. Anytime your delver is trying to get from one landmark to another, that's a delve. And every delve is defined by which tier of heart it's on, ranging from 1 to 4, as well as how much stress it deals when players take stress there and how much resistance it has. I find that last bit to be very interesting. A delve has a resistance rating, much like a health point pool. When players make rolls against the journey itself, the stress that they induce is counted against the delve's resistance. And when that resistance is reduced to 0, the journey or delve is complete. Any given map in a game of Heart is meant to be filled in by both GMs and players as they progress, not in advance. This is meant to keep things flexible for the GM so they can adjust details as needed and allow the players to do some of the creative steering during the session. The GM section of this book starts off with a lot of helpful generic advice for running RPGs, broken down into the big rules of thumb that segue into specific advice for running Heart. One of the most important bits here is that combat should not always be the answer. The authors implore the GM to give adversaries a motivation, heap plenty of information on players so they can formulate a non-combat solution, and always give players a way out of having to do combat, generally. The lore section of the book is relatively brief and starts off with yet another reminder that there is no canon and that you, as a GM, can do with the setting whatever you like. You get about 6 or 8 pages of setting description here, which is fun to read, but actually the following chapter goes ahead and absolutely blasts you with setting details. Landmarks are described as points of interest and conflict within the Heart. Quote, each landmark remains in place only as long as the inhabitants of Heart believe it to be there. Which is to say, the will and belief of the people in Heart can define its very nature, at least at the higher tiers closer to the surface. Haunts are also defined here. These are individual areas within a particularly safe landmark called a haven, where you can trade goods and dump stress. Anytime you use a haunt, you work towards upgrading it, and eventually it will have the ability to remove more stress per use. The book lists a tremendous number of deliciously described landmarks, organized by tier. Tier 0 is essentially the city of Spire, or at least the nether realm between Spire and the Heart. Then there are over a dozen landmarks described for Tier 1, 15 for Tier 2, which all, by the way, really sideload a lot of lore and setting detail for GMs. The book tells you 4 or 5 times that the setting is yours to mold as you wish, and it does leave a lot of little blank spots for you to fill in, but honestly, these landmark descriptions are very rich with unique detail that establishes a lot of the look and feel of the setting, if you want it to. Tier 3 is where weirdness rules. Gravity, time, and space are all anybody's guess. Here's where the GM's imagination can really run a little wild. Wilder than the authors, I'm not sure. I think I could make a whole video discussing the unbridled weirdness and the creativity of these descriptions, but it would probably just end up sounding like I was on drugs or something. The Adversaries chapter covers 28 normal strength creatures and 5 so-called legendary creatures. I say normal strength, but really most of these creatures are pretty deadly, and you could see why the authors implore the GM and players to rely on non-combat solutions. All of these creatures are pretty much nightmare fuel no matter how you slice it, and I think a lot of the joy of running a game of Heart would be to freak your players out with an encounter with one of these. The 5 adversaries are meant to be end of campaign bosses or just insurmountable forces of nature. You know, I'm not sure which of these 5 won the Ennie Award for Best Adversary, or if it was maybe one of the normal strength ones. Even if you never get one into your game, the descriptions are a lot of fun to read. Alright, here are my thoughts on Heart, the City Beneath. Right amount of weirdness. There's a paragraph in the GM section of this book that warns the GM not to make it too weird and to inject normal elements into the game in order to make the weird bits have more impact. This is good advice, except it's really hard to know every player's tolerance and taste for weirdness. For example, if you have a table full of players who have played lots of stuff like Ultraviolet Grasslands and Troika, but also more traditional settings like the ones from 5e or Pathfinder, it's just going to be hard as a GM to nail the right level of weirdness for them. And weirdness really is one of the major selling points of this game. Pros, mechanics. There are a bunch of things I like about the rules in this game. The beats inform the GM and players on what is the motivation of each player session to session. The Zenith abilities allow players to blow their characters up in huge scenes of glorious death. The Delve mechanics treat each journey like an NPC with health points to be hacked away at, solidifying the game as a straightforward point crawl. And the simplicity of the core mechanics is something that I really appreciate. Artwork. This is one of those books where the art matches the words. Felix Miall delivers on the weird horror of Heart. I know that the authors intended the Heart itself to be one of many possible things, but I would have loved to see Felix's rendition of what it might look like. Unique setting. The authors keep saying the setting is yours to do with what you will and that nothing is canon, but their version of things as written is a very tantalizing version. As a GM, I would definitely want to read everything in the Landmarks and Adversaries chapters before trying to make up stuff on my own. At the very least, by doing that, my own imagination would be that much better informed. So there you have it, Heart, the City Beneath, the de facto tabletop RPG of 2021, successor to Spire and the mother of half a dozen supplements that I have yet to read. I've left links down below to all this stuff, as well as Rowan, Rook, and Decard's Discord server. And thanks as always for watching. See ya!